All right, hello and welcome to the video. Today I'm going to be following up on some comments that were made on a video that is over a year old at this point. Most of you have probably seen it. It's the one where I'm restructuring the NBA landscape in terms of its divisions with adding 2 new expansion teams in Seattle and Las Vegas. And back in that video, I decided to go with 6 divisions, all made up of 4 teams each. And I made that video because of how impending expansion in the NBA seemed like it was going to be, just based off all the rumors and things going around. But now, a little over a year later, it seems like that is much less the case. Don't get me wrong, I still wouldn't be surprised if it happens in the next couple years or so, but recent developments and rumors have suggested that the NBA is much more interested in the Europe expansion idea. The NBA Europe is what they call it. So basically the idea is it's just going to be a NBA sanctioned league over in Europe. There's a couple of the current EuroLeague teams that are already sounding like they're signing on to that. They're very interested in linking up with the NBA in that way. Pretty interesting, but yeah, from what it sounds like, something with that is going to develop pretty soon, and that might take the place of expansion in the near future. So we might not actually see 32 teams in the NBA in the next few seasons. But still, for this hypothetical, I would still like to go through the exercise. As you can see, I have pins laid out in each of the NBA cities. The red pins are for the 15 teams in the Western Conference, and the blue is the current Eastern Conference. The 2 gray pins are the most likely expansion cities if we do indeed see the NBA decide to do that, and that is Seattle and Las Vegas. Obviously, those 2 cities are both going to be in the Western Conference, so I will give them red. So now we have 17 teams in the West versus 15 teams in the East, so obviously we need to subtract 1 from the West to add to the East to make it 16 and 16. And just like in that original video, I feel like that team should be the Minnesota Timberwolves because of their proximity to the Eastern Conference teams and their lack of proximity to the Western Conference teams. There's some people who think it should be New Orleans. There's a lot of people who think it should be Memphis just because those 2 cities are the farthest east that are not in the Eastern Conference. But they have OKC and the Texas teams pretty nearby. So I think it makes much more sense for the Minnesota Timberwolves to be added to the Eastern Conference. So now we can make our new divisions using the 8-team per division structure. So the West will be broken up into 2 divisions as well as the East. And the way that makes most sense to me is to have a Pacific division over here in the West. And I think that should obviously include Seattle, Portland, the Kings, the Warriors, both the LA teams. And I just noticed that I forgot to change a detail about the map that I was doing for another video idea where I was moving teams a little bit and changing their names and stuff. And so I had the Clippers in San Diego. So just pretend that pin is up here in Los Angeles as well. But that is the Clippers here. So obviously all those teams on the Pacific coast make up 6 teams and we need 8. So obviously the 2 next most close teams are Vegas and Phoenix. And I think they would both make perfect additions to this Pacific division. And then that leaves us the rest of the 8 teams in the Western Conference as their own division. And I think that should be called the Gulf Division maybe, even though only 6 of the 8 teams are actually, near the Gulf. I just think that name makes the most sense to me. And also just it has the best vibes. I like the name being a little bit more specific rather than just calling it like Central. Central's just a little bit more vague and boring. It's just going to be Denver and Utah that are going to feel somewhat out of place. And that brings us to the Eastern Conference, where we're definitely going to have to choose one team that's going to feel out of place because there's 7 teams over here in the Great Lakes region versus the 9 over here on the Eastern Seaboard, which I don't know. I'm not against having different number of teams in a division if somebody wants to take that route, but I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that would be in favor of having a strict certain number of teams per division. And so for this video's sake, we are going to try to stick to that, but that's not going to stop me from making a Great Lakes division. And I'll give their icons this tealish turquoise color. And so that division is going to consist of the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Chicago Bulls, the Indiana Pacers, the Detroit Pistons, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Toronto Raptors to give us the obvious 7. And now that brings us to an impasse where I feel like Washington might be the best option, to be honest, although it feels weird to not include them in this Atlantic division that we have formed over here. If you want to choose maybe Atlanta or Charlotte instead as 2 of the cities that are the least close to being Atlantic cities, but then proximity wise, that would just be a little bit weirder and out of place. Like at least Washington is still pretty close to these other 7 cities here. And actually looking at the East, that makes me feel like how I did it last time with the 4 teams per division would actually work better because then you could have these 4 up here in the Northeast with Boston, New York, Brooklyn, and Philly, and then have these 4 teams down here in the Southeast together with Miami, Orlando, Atlanta, and Charlotte. And you can perfectly split these 8 down the middle to form those divisions. But either way, I think this would work just fine. And to give more of a zoomed out view here are the divisions. And like I said, we've got the Pacific Division, the Gulf Division, the Great Lakes Division, and the Atlantic Division. And so I'm sure people are going to let me know what they think in the comments. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you guys next video.